Hey everyone, welcome to Office Hours with Cloud Posse, your weekly dose of insider DevOps trends, AWS news, and Terraform insights, all sourced from our sweetops community, plus a live Q&A that you can't find anywhere else. It's January 10th, 2024. My name's Eric Osterman, and I'll be your host. Real quick, I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We are a DevOps accelerator for startups that helps teams who are overwhelmed with AWS. We do this by leveraging our over 200 Terraform modules that have been battle tested and downloaded over 100 million times. No matter where you find yourself on this journey, we're here to help your startup launch better products faster so you can free up your bandwidth for innovation and nail your value delivery every time. And if you or your team has been banging your head against the wall with underperforming infrastructure, just head over to cloudposse.com/quiz, answer a few quick questions, and we'll chart a roadmap for success free. First, now, how can you maximize today's session? First off, our format is very informal. Engage as much as you'd like, ask questions. And if you're curious about any of our open source tools or modules, go for it. For those on the recording, we host these calls live, so don't miss out. Join us live by going to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, cloudposse.com/officehours. Now, I do have one ask. If you find any portion of today's office hours valuable, please share it with your team. Just head over to youtube.com/cloudposse or send us a short testimonial about the value you're getting in Slack or leave a comment on the YouTube video. Just go to slack.cloudposse.com to sign up. Remember, we're not just simply creating content here. We are building a community, and we can't do that without your help. So with that, let's get into announcements. Here's what we have on the docket for today. First is, we talk a lot about Atmos. Atmos is a tool that we've written here at Cloud Posse. It's a workflow automation tool, configuration management tool. We use it heavily together with Terraform, Helm file, and other tools as well. We have integrations with things like GitHub Actions, and we've just taken another pass at updating these stocks and improve them. So if you are using Atmos and you want to use it with GitHub Actions, now is a good time to check that out again. We talk about how to implement Terraform plans in GitHub Actions using our strategy, Terraform applies, and drift detection. So all of that you get out of the box for free if you use Atmos and GitHub Actions. Next announcement is also Atmos related. So one of the interesting things about Atmos is it's evolved a lot over the past few years, and it's become its own framework, if you will, with its own conventions and design patterns. There is no one way to use Atmos, and how you use it will depend on some of the circumstances you have, what you're trying to optimize. If you're trying to optimize for super dry configuration, if you're trying to optimize for controls that enable certain teams only to make changes to configuration with approval, for example, leveraging code owners and config files, whether you're dynamically generating YAML configurations, like let's say you're an enterprise SaaS product, and every time a customer signs up, you need to spin up a new environment, a dedicated environment for them. All these different use cases have different design patterns that will work better or worse for them. So we've documented now, we've taken a first pass at a lot of the design patterns we've been using over the years. We're going to continue to add to this library of design patterns as well. We go about describing the motivation of why we're publishing all of these and what is a design patterns and why you should care. From my perspective, what's nice about it is it puts a name to the concept, it labels it, so it's something we can talk about conceptually. It's so we can converge on a common set of patterns as a community using Atmos. So configurations aren't always entirely bespoke. And just raise the bar. So we are the creators of Atmos, so obviously we know it better than anyone. But we've also learned a lot from some of our customers, pushing the envelope on how it can be used, and some of those lessons learned are in here as well. All right. Any questions on Atmos before we move on to the rest of the announcements? All right. Small one here is, I mean, it was announced some time ago, Aurora V1 serverless would be shutting down. The sad thing was this was the first foray into like a managed service by AWS. They could scale down to 0. Problem is, it never really worked that well. They also released V2 of Aurora serverless that totally was a re-implementation basically, and that does not include the scaling down to 0 portion. So anyways, V1 is shutting down. It's pretty unusual that Amazon sunset services, but this is one example of that. And again, they're not sunsetting serverless Aurora. They're sunsetting V1 of serverless Aurora. Next is something that was shared with me. It was an interesting map of all projects on GitHub. And you can zoom in here and search for projects like Cloud Posse, Atmos. Yeah, that was working. Cloud Posse, Atmos. There we go. And where it exists in the landscape of everything on GitHub. I'm not sure I agree with the classification of being in PowerShell land, but whatever. Still kind of cool visual representation of the graph.
I think we can agree that we're probably in Cloudera. It may be GitHub Nation or whatever there, but your point of the higher or of the deeper one of being in PowerShell doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, does not. I wonder how they arrived at that.
I'm just surprised there's so many islands and no continents of sorts.
Gotcha. I guess what it begs the question, what is in this kind of a topographical map, what is the definition of a continent versus an island? Where's the line drawn? Arguably, these are mostly continents consisting of lots of countries.
Yeah, I was just about to say Australia's both, right?
Yeah.
Oh, this isn't actual like a geographic map. This is like all made like things that they made up.
Well, I know, but he's saying, I guess Australia is a continent and a country in this case.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you were saying the thing that is Australia on this map.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't think there is an Australia though on the map, is there?
No, that's what I was saying. None of
Yeah.
these are actually real like geographic places. This is a land of make believe from GitHub packages.
Do they have a key or like a I don't know, a glossary for these their different names that they've come up with? Because when I saw Cloudera, I thought, oh, Cloudera, the company publishes like a ton of open source. But now I get it. But it's kind of confusing. They made some like very interesting naming choices that they basically grouped these into.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
wonder.
and then you have like Vue, whatever that is, like Vuetopia over there, which I assume is everything around like the Vue, like React framework, or React competitor framework, I should say.
Yeah. All right. That project. All right. And this seemed like a pretty funny, or I mean funny or funny, it depends how you're affected by it. But how can something like this have only come out now? Matt, can you talk about this one some more?
Yeah, and unfortunately, it needs a little bit of history, so I'll try to do it quickly. But going back, there was a developer, I forget the guy's name, who published the kick package to npm KIK. He got a trademark dispute from the messenger kick, and they asked him to remove his package. He actually predated them, but npm nonetheless sided with Kick the company and asked him to relinquish the Kick namespace in npm to Kick the company. He got really pissed off, and he unpublished all of his open source packages that he had published to npm, which included LastPass. And there were like millions of packages that were relying on LastPass, and he essentially broke the internet by doing that. So subsequent to that, npm put in a policy that said you can unpublish a package if you're a package owner, only if there aren't, like, they give you some finite time frame of that you can unpublish it for, plus the extra caveat that it has to have no dependencies on that specific version of the package for you to be able to unpublish it. So that's how the npm rule came to be. Then these guys, a couple of guys were doing like an experiment just to work on some things, and they created this everything package, which basically installs every package from npm. They just did it as like as an experiment with no malintent in place. These guys are actually pretty well known in the developer community, and they're not bad actors, or anything like that. So npm had a limitation of like 800 package dependencies in your package dependency. So they built this whole process to get a list of all the packages that exist, chunk them into submodules, and then create all these submodules like A to C, D to F or whatever. And then they basically created these submodules that each would publish a significant, or would basically rely on some number of sub packages, and then the everything package then points at all of those sub packages to which there are fewer than 800 of them, to get like every single npm package like listed in its scope. But it has the unintended effect. In those sub packages, instead of pinning to a module, they're pinning to the splat operator, which is basically just saying every version of the package. And then what they're doing is, because they then published this, they then effectively stopped any npm maintainer from ever being able to unpublish one of their npm modules, even if there are no dependencies on it, because this automatically depends on every version that's ever published. So I know that was a long explanation, but hopefully that made sense. So they unintentionally broke unpublishing by npm, and then they've contacted npm and actually said, this was a silly experiment. Can you just delete our everything package so everyone can go back to normal? And npm basically hasn't fixed it. So, so they deleted the everything package from GitHub, but it's still published to npm. So I don't know what at this point can be done other than npm fixing this, and for some reason npm isn't fixing this. So while it was an experiment that went awry by these developers, the blame from this point forward squarely falls on the npm core maintainers to fix this problem. So
I assume they haven't fixed it, because some other kitty is just going to come back and do the same thing over again until they fix the fundamental situation.
Yeah, there's got to be some way. I think they thought they were doing that by limiting npm, or package.json to a maximum of 800 dependencies or whatever it was. But then these guys created a chunking solution basically to make that, to make that not happen. And then you know, so to your point, someone will exploit this again.
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is, honestly, because you don't want the left pad situation to happen again. Like all these people like depend on a particular package, but you also want to give package maintainers the ability to unpublish things that they choose that they need to unpublish, like if there's a major security flaw or they accidentally publish something as a version that it shouldn't have been published as, or you know, something along those lines. So I don't really know what the answer is, but something needs to be done to be able to like fix this.
To me, it feels like it should be something along the lines of PageRank algorithm, like, you know, the number of things that has to be somehow a factor, the number of things that depend on it.
Yeah. And they have that in the registry, actually. So when you publish a new package, it determines a graph for your package, and they actually know how many packages you depend on and how many packages depend on you immediately. So that could easily be done if you're deemed important or over some certain level or whatever. You should you should be able to do that. But
and presumably they have some spam packages as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. What I was going to say is this this brings up the important point of don't blindly trust your supply chain.
Yeah. So what I'm curious though is, like, going back to your backstory, which I vaguely recall, I didn't know that it was related to this trademark dispute.
Yeah.
Wouldn't though, like, this whole thing that they implemented to prevent this from happening though would have prevented them from doing the thing that ended up causing this. What I mean is, this kick namespace was, arguably trademarked, and this package was in that namespace.
It wasn't. I mean, the guy who actually created Kick created it before the company ever existed.
Right. Well, yeah, one can argue the merit of the trademark or whatever, which is not this point. This is more like, okay, so suppose they had this system in place before that, then they wouldn't have been able to do the thing they wanted him to do, because all those packages depended on it with left pad.
Right. Well, so it wasn't in the Kick namespace. It was some other, like, they actually had the package called Kick.
Okay.
Like, and that was basically, so it was just like, npm install Kick. Okay. And when you did that, it installed his package, not the Kick Messenger SDK or whatever they wanted to do. Right. So you can transfer ownership of a namespace to someone else.
Right.
So in that case, he would have been able to do what he wanted to do, but he got miffed that he predated Kick the Messenger, and yet NPM basically told him to give up his name, and he said, "I don't want to do that." So his like hissy fit of like not disagreeing with their decision was, "I'll just pull everything I've ever published to NPM," which included LeftPad, but it wasn't in the same namespace or anything else. It was it was somewhere else.
Yeah, right. I understand now the nuance there. Yeah. So Kick and his LeftPad were perhaps in the same namespace, but there wasn't the namespace under contention. It was Kick.
Right. Project. It was the actual package.
And it wasn't that the internet depended on Kick. They depended on LeftPad. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. And like, I mean, it was like, I forget the number, but it was like hundreds of thousands of packages or something like that had either a dependency or transient dependency on that one little LeftPad thing. So yeah.
There's that classic meme pick, right? The open source projects all depend on
the one that's not maintained by some developer, since 2000. Yeah, there it is.
All right. Anybody have something else to add to this before we move on? And let's see, the Zoom chat had something here. You must allow maintainers to maintain their products as they see fit. If you require supply chain stability, then you should fork the code and mirror the npm package into a private repo.
Yeah. So for what it's worth, the end to that saga was the only time that npm has ever done this. They went back to a backup and actually restored the package to unbreak all of those things, and basically didn't allow him to delete it, which again could be argued that they don't have the right because it's his intellectual property. He can do what he sees fit to.
But it was an MIT license, then they can have a copy, I believe.
Probably a copy. Yeah. I don't remember what the license was on it, but it's, as far as I know, it's the only time npm has ever done that. So and it took them a while to find it from a backup or whatever, but it was the only way to like literally unbreak the internet. So
interesting indeed. Well, that was that story. In other news, OpenTofu has officially released 1.6.0. So that's exciting news. I know it's taken a while to get to this point, but I suspect subsequent releases will go faster and faster and faster as the team is getting up to speed on the code base. And a lot of effort had gone into, of course, making it safe to release and not violating any trademarks and patents or whatever restrictions of the BSL. I read somewhere else that there is talks on how to support interpolation and backend configs in OpenTofu, which would be really exciting, as well as parameters in module source definitions, so those can be parameterized. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of issues. I think there's an issue for each one of those things, like in the actual issues.
Yeah. Next announcement was something trending on Reddit. Gaia. It is a front end for Terraform, invoking modules and deploying them. Don't know how I feel about these things. They always demo well, but is it really the way you want to work? And often these types of things are orthogonal to doing GitOps. Like, unless this is literally, doing a GitOps style operation behind the scenes to manage the state, and I haven't looked deeper into it, then it's not really that interesting to me. So that is Gaia.
Yeah, I think it. I only slightly more deeply kicked the tires than you did, and on looking at it, and from what my take was, is that it writes all the operations that you perform through the GUI into a MongoDB repo, and then it actually has a history of like all the things that have been done, and I think you can revert from it and kind of back out and all that kind of
thing. Matt Gaia says Mitchell Hashimoto. All right, who was that big? Oh, sorry. I thought it was related to what Matt was just saying. Never mind.
No.
Yeah. Unrelated. Alex was posting in the Zoom chat. Who's the big boss that left Hashi? Apparently not related to the contentious license change. Yeah, and that was one of the co-founders, Mitchell Hashimoto, and it really wasn't related to the license change, but probably was. If you look back at all the announcements and all the changes that have been going on in HashiCorp, this had been planned for a long time. I can't help but think that, Mitchell probably wasn't happy with the trajectory of some things, but I have no knowledge of that. That's just me projecting my own feelings. Yeah. Company.
I can say my interpretation also, like with the asterisk, I don't want to speak for Mitchell, is that I don't believe that being part of a gigantic public company with all the governance and money raising and strategic directions of becoming a large pressured company to meet quarterly earnings and all that kind of thing was in alignment with what he found interesting at the having met him several times and talked to him several times, like at his core, he's a coding tech nerd, but a really smart kind of guy on top of that. And I think he found a way to gradually exit without doing significant damage to the thing that provides the vast majority of his personal net worth, which he did the smart way. So I think that's my take on the whole thing.
That sounds exactly what I think it is too. So yeah.
We announced earlier that also Mitchell Hashimoto was, now that he's retired from HashiCorp, working more on his other projects. One of his first things on his plate was a house cleaning, and he's abandoning or orphaning a bunch of open source projects. And he basically said, I have quit Golang, so I'm not writing any more Go projects. So going back to that supply chain thing, he
deleted LeftPad. Actually, Mitchell H/Homedir is used in a ton of projects. So a ton of Go projects. So it'll be interesting to see if he just leaves it there or someone takes it over or forks it somewhere and people start moving away from that. So
yeah, I haven't followed.
It's just like a way to.
It's
really simple. It's like a platform agnostic way to locate like the user's home directory. Basically, it's like a really dumb, like simple little project, but tons of people use it. Kind of like LeftPad.
Yeah, dumb but necessary. Those types of things are actually annoying when you're dealing with Windows and all the different Unix distributions.
Exactly.
Yeah, the other thing about him was that he was jumping into that weird language that I hadn't heard of for like a couple of years. Zig. I might be botching the name.
No, that's
I don't know.
correct.
We already talked about it. Yeah, but interesting move.
Yeah. So the next one was this here, was presumably somebody's side project here. A convenient way of setting up port forwarding, kubectl proxy for your apps running in Kubernetes. So it's a tray app, so you can quickly enable those to get to those services. One of the biggest annoyances for me is that there hasn't become a more native way in Kubernetes to do this. And if you do deploy things like inside your clusters, such as Argo CD or even the Kubernetes dashboard itself, there was no mainstream way, in my opinion, for exposing that securely. And the proxy, kubectl proxy was the solution, but to me, that was never the solution. So I guess this is a band-aid for that solution. Next two, I haven't read at all. Matt, you were the one that shared these with me. Were you able to add a little bit more context to either of these?
Yeah, so this one looks like they added the ability to monitor through CloudWatch connections that are traversing like direct connect, attachments and VPNs like to your back across to your like off cloud, on-prem data center, etc. So you can get sort of end-to-end views of how things are looking across, when you have dedicated connections or across, transit gateway to transit gateway connections and a bunch of other things. So it's basically just expanding the monitoring capability of CloudWatch in this case.
Okay.
And I guess that's what they call it, right? Hybrid connectivity. When all of your network isn't contained within the AWS cloud, it might be somewhere else on, either in your own data center or in another cloud, presumably as well.
Yeah. And the other announcement was improvements to AWS Config.
Yeah. So before you didn't have a choice. If you have AWS Config enabled, you would get a recorded configuration change for everything that changed in your account, no matter what. People who have highly dynamic workloads really complained that they're constantly scaling things up and down like throughout the day, and they didn't want to see every little change, just kind of like periodic snapshots of where they were at. So this gives the ability now to set it to be periodic. So basically to only take a snapshot if, like, let's say you could do it every day at midnight, and then it will only record deltas from yesterday at midnight to today at midnight, not necessarily all the resources that scaled up and down within the day, as kind of the item to record within AWS Config at that point. So
what I'm confused about is I thought AWS Config worked through evaluations, and you configure the number of evaluations you want. So I thought it already worked this way, but apparently, obviously, it didn't.
No.
So, okay.
It basically, the way it works, I believe, under the hood, is it hooks EventBridge, and it looks at all the EventBridge events for creation and creation and deletion of certain resources that it's tracking, and then it basically like evaluates all those changes. And then you're right, that's how you're charged. It's based on how many config rules are evaluated, but that doesn't mean that you choose how often the configuration items underneath it are. That's what we're talking about here for configuration items. So rules are written against configuration items. Configuration items are the current state of an AWS resource, basically. So like I have an EC2 instance that has this IP address with these NICs attached and has these security groups attached and has all those things. Like that's all a configuration item. And what this is allowing you to do is choose how often you evaluate what your total population of configuration items actually looks like, since many of them are just ephemeral and they're only lasting for short periods of time. Like while videos being transcoded, you spin up an EC2 instance and then kill it off, and it only lasted for 30 minutes while that happened. There's no reason to record that because you don't really care that existed for 30 minutes to kind of do your overall like capacity planning and understanding like what your total population looks like. That's kind of the argument of why they implemented this.
And just to complete my understanding, so these events going over the event bridge, for example, each one of those would trigger a rule evaluation.
If you have configuration item recording turned on in that particular region where those things are created, yes.
Okay. So now that instead of that being real time, now that could be periodic.
Yeah. So the event bridge, like the event bridge notifications happen no matter what. That's just an AWS built-in thing.
Yeah.
So they always, for every operation that occurs in your account, basically they send messages across the event bridge. What I'm presuming is happening is something under the hood is like only taking like it's a queue or whatever and doing something, and then it only does the rule evaluations like or the evaluation to determine whether or not there's a configuration change to a CI on that periodic basis. But I don't know how it's actually implemented. I'm just guessing on that one.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
All right. Next thing on my list was something that we missed last week in announcements that caught my attention is EKS now surfacing cluster health status details. Seems like a nice thing to have. I wonder if this shows up then in the customer health dashboard.
Yeah, it shows up on the EKS dashboard. I definitely saw that. I don't know if it filters up to that total, the higher level one.
And lastly, Michael, do you want to talk about this one you shared?
Yeah, indeed. Really, I guess the interest that I had in this one was the fact that it's affects GitHub Actions runners, self-hosted runners particularly. So if you're using the free runners or public runners where every time your workflow runs, GitHub spins up a runner for you, your job runs, and then it goes away. You really don't have to worry about this type of attack as much. But if you do have self-hosted runners, it gets a little bit more interesting because what people can do is, I guess if the workflow logs are exposed, and I think you just have to be logged in to view logs of public repositories. Oh, and I guess the number one thing is never put a self-hosted runner on a public repository. That's the number one way to just kind of, work around this. But if you have a public repository where someone can see the logs and observe the jobs that are running and the names of the runners, then they can determine if a runner is being reused. And then with the kind of the attack vector is they'll submit a pull request, and it could be like this article goes on, they could just do like a documentation, like fix a typo or something like that. And then you accept the pull request. And if your rules are such that anybody who gets accepted is now a contributor and their future contributions are auto approved, then they have a vector to add their own malicious code at that point. So essentially they can create a workflow that runs on your persistent runner, and then they can add their own persistence for themselves. So basically open up a backdoor, modify your workflows to run some other programs, or whatever the case is for their own, malicious or unintended use. And the crazy example that the researchers found was they had access to the repository where GitHub builds their images for runners. So if they had access to that repository and they injected some malicious code, they could have even affected the temporary runners that everybody else is using, and they could have put something funky and malicious in that particular code. So that was really kind of like the craziest part to me. And then like the little bit of subtext here, I guess even more interesting if you're interested in bug bounties. The researchers, they got the bug bounty from GitHub. It looks like, yeah, right there at 20K. But then they also found other companies that had this same sort of attack vector in place and also submitted bug bounties to those companies, and they're getting cash from those guys as well. So, I mean, totally legit. There's nothing malicious about their approach. It's probably a good thing that they found this first and did it the proper way as opposed to some other, more malicious entity might have found it and did something even more crazy with it. But I guess the main lesson learned here is to, if you do have self-hosted runners, I would say number one, make those repositories public, or rather private, the ones that use them. And then also don't have auto-approved pull requests, or don't auto-approve pull requests from folks that you don't trust, or aren't part of your company, your team, or whatever the case is.
Yeah, I agree with those. Or disable, like depending on the nature of the repository, you might not need to accept pull requests. In that case, just disable the pull requests. But the recommendation that you said, just disable pull request runs on non-org members by default. That's a good one to enable. It's tedious for your reviewers, but it's necessary from a security perspective.
Yeah. I think GitHub actually now made that the default.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that it won't run pull requests from, it won't run actions on pull requests from forks.
Yeah. It eliminates a whole class of problems. Just whackable. All right. That's all I think I had for today that I wanted to bring up.
On that page you were just on, as you were scrolling, I just had to make a note because I saw that there's a giant data breach from Mr. Cooper, who is like one of the nation's largest mortgage processors, and they happen to process my mortgage, and I had no idea. I hadn't seen this before, so now I need to go look at that.
Interesting. Yeah. So if anybody wants to know about Matt's mortgage information, now's
Yeah,
the time.
there you go. It's not that exciting. If anyone wants to pay it off, I'll send you the details directly. But it says 14.7 million customers were affected. That's a lot.
There's just so many of these breaches. It's just like spam notifications in my inbox now. I almost don't pay attention to it, even if it affects me.
Yeah, I'm pretty good about it. I don't think they actually notified me, even though they said they started notifying people on December 15th. So I'm going to go search my email again. So
there was also something over the holidays affecting every major password manager, like 1Password and LastPass and those about it. Like malicious websites could trick it into submitting passwords or something. I missed that. Weird, not showing up here.
yeah, I hadn't heard about that one. For what it's worth, 1Password has pretty good detection. Like if you're submitting your password to something that doesn't match the URL of the account that you have defined inside of 1Password, it will actually warn you and say like, are you sure you want to do this, and that kind of thing. So
yeah, this was the one I was thinking of. I didn't look too closely.
What are the three others? Just want to know if I'm on there.
DashLane and LastPass.
DashLane and LastPass and
What's
three
this
others.
and three others?
Yeah.
Over there. Sorry.
Yeah.
Is Bitbucket in there? Or not? Yeah.
Bitbucket, they have a password?
Wait, not Bitbucket. What am I talking about?
BitKeeper.
BitKeeper, is that what it's called?
BitLocker.
Oh, BitLocker, is that what
The
it is?
Bitwarden. There it is.
BitLocker also has. Oh no, that's the encryption thing on Microsoft. You're right.
Yeah, Warden doesn't mention in the article for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm on the wrong page somehow. Hold on, let me.
Oh, they have all your passwords now, Eric.
Ah.
Bit. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. I'll put in the Zoom
Did you see the
chat.
size? By the way, did you see the size of that banner that came up?
I know, that was really annoying.
Yeah.
Especially when it's fixed, position fixed. Yeah, sorry, that was an internal joke, guys.
Yes, we were joking about the size of banners. So
All right. Any questions any additional announcements we missed that caught your attention? Otherwise, we'll get into the Q&A. All right. Any questions we can get answered today? I have something kind of unrelated, but really curious about 3D printers now that they've kind of come down in pricing and things. If anyone's been using those or have one or make any recommendations on where I should look, I don't know where to begin because there's just too many.
I've used my friend's bamboo one a few times.
That one looks really
print
nice.
up some stuff for my my aquarium,
Mm.
like mounting brackets and a bunch of other things, and I've been pretty impressed with how it works.
Yeah, that was one that was considering. All right. Any questions? Totally open-ended. Can be on anything. Career advice. And if not, we can always end a little bit early today.
I was just thinking back to our discussion about supply chains, and this is more just kind of an anecdote, where even I was infected, not infected, but affected by an internal supply chain. We do have Artifactory that I work with, and but it's only accessible off of through VPN. And I thought I had cached everything, so I was working with an application trying to build it into a container image, and I could run the application locally because when I had pulled everything initially, everything was fine. But when I went to build the image off of VPN, I thought I had everything cached properly, but I guess apparently during the build, there was something that would reach out to the internal Artifactory to pull down, some jar file or whatever, and it wasn't there. So when I ran the image, it would fail immediately because this package wasn't present. And the 2-day debug spiral for me was, it works locally, when I run it, everything's fine. But then when I run the image, build the image clean, it fails. And then I just so happened to sort of reset everything. And I got on VPN and I went through the whole workflow of running the app, or, running the app, pulling down all the packages, and then building the image while I was on VPN, and it worked. So I don't know, just another little supply chain. It's like an internal supply chain thing. I just didn't have access to it from my local build process, not a, and I guess that's the difference. I was building it locally as opposed to building it in CICD, a hosted CICD, where all the access would have been in place. So if anybody ever comes across that issue, I don't know, one more point to consider, just get back on VPN.
Makes sense.
Hey, I asked a question months ago that I, then unfortunately was not around and to see if it ever popped up. But AWS RDS IAM database authentication. What are folks' experience with it? Is it worth it? We're just sending somebody to investigate it in the coming weeks, and trying to just avoid the, hey, shared passwords for Postgres access problem, and giving each individual person their own IAM authentication in, and wondering, how do people deal with that? What's the is there another solution we should look at to compare it against? Is there anything open source? That sort of discussion.
Yeah, happy to answer this, but Matt, do you want to take a first pass?
Yeah, I don't really have much insight on it other than I've kicked the tires and used it a bit. But I don't think I have any deep experience that I can really give anything insightful on it.
So this was one that was in our design decisions for a long time. And what the recommendation, at least at the time, was that IAM authentication was really only intended for human users of the database due to its rate limits. That must have been its design intention. So make sure that that's the consideration. For customers that ultimately want to do that, though, that's only a drop in the bucket for the things that need that functionality of temporary rotated credentials and linking that to IAM. So those customers tend to be enterprise customers, and then they rely instead on one of the many alternative tools, like enterprise offerings. I am drawing a blank.
Strong DM. You're talking about
Strong
like
DM.
using something like that
Strong
to be
DM
the
was what I
middleman.
was gonna say
Yep.
next. So then that's where Strong DM comes in, or alternatives.
Yeah. We're using Tailscale with this client where I guess there's the differentiator. It's like they're not always in the middle, and like, it's network access, not actual, like they don't know the protocol and can't get in the middle of authentication like that with what we've picked for getting into the network. But that's good to know that you would only use it on the user side of the equation because of rate limits. I'll definitely
And then you look at the
share this
number
with
of
my team.
examples out there on how to do it, and you realize, yeah, I guess that's true, because the programmatic examples to do it are few and far between, and you have to make sure, like you don't want you don't want to fix one problem and introduce another. So now, like one of the most common causes of website outages is you max out connections, for example, on the database because you scaled up your web app because the database slowed down, and your auto scaling then scaled up, and then you create a swarm on top of your database and make it worse.
Yeah.
This just exasperates that problem because now you are creating more of these logins for the processes. So, how you implement that in a scalable manner, you want to make sure that, each pod, for example, is not doing that, would be my assertion there. And if each pod is not doing that, then you have these credentials and they need to be stored somewhere. And how are you doing that safely? I think it'd be interesting if this was implemented. Presumably this would be something easier. This is armchair banter right now. If this was implemented in Kubernetes, so that there was a process that just updated the shared secret for the database and the pods reloaded with that, I could see it working. Just keep in mind that you have to have the simultaneous I don't know if it works with simultaneous versions credentials working, because there's some period of time you have both processes on the old credentials.
One pod coming up, one pod. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah,
Although
I guess from the application side, it sounds like it's, already hearing you talk about it, it does sound, probably more complicated than the can of worms that it's worth opening.
For the customers that wanted it, they were on Rails, and I could only find like some old Stack Overflow post or something on it that was 5 years old. Maybe there's
interesting.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I was just looking, and it looks like there were kind of a flurry of new things talking about it, maybe about 4 to 6 months ago. So they might have updated some stuff in there. Including a Rails example I actually just was looking at. And basically you can use IAM credentials to exchange for an auth token that you can then use to authenticate to the database, like that way. And by calling an API, and it looks like that's the way that a lot of people are doing it. And if you're using it in Kubernetes, then presumably you could use the new pod identities to give them an IAM role so that those pods have the ability to call that API to exchange it for a token, and then be able to use that token to auth the database.
That makes sense. Do you mind sharing that, Matt?
Yeah. Let me just I have to hit back in my browser a couple of times, and then I'll find it for you.
Anyway, that's the only one.
Yeah, here it is. I'll post it here in the Zoom chat. This is that was the article I was just reading about how to do it. And it looks like that was written in August. That shows a Rails example of doing it. Yeah, and it looks like there's an AWS authentication plugin, like to Postgres in this case, it looks like. So yeah, so I guess it's worth maybe reading this and understanding like how the whole thing ties together.
Cool. This is great. Appreciate that. And thanks for sharing y'all's experience.
Oh, there's actually there's a node example in here too of how to do it. So it looks like you did it with both. Oh yeah, and there's a package now, AWS /RDS, AWS SDK /RDS signer, and they have a package where you basically using your IAM credentials, you say the region, the host name, the port, and the username you want to do it with. You call get auth token, and then it gives you back, and you can specify how long those auth tokens are good for, and then you basically get an authorization token back and do that. So that would be, I guess, the programmatic way to access the database. And then and then you could use the regular IAM authentication way for users to access it. So it looks like maybe they removed some of those rate limits or something. So do some research on that.
But I think the key thing is what I highlight here on the screen, and if you're using like a Java process, and this is handled centrally, and all the threads can reuse those credentials for some period of time, and that might work. But if literally every pod is short-lived, or you have lots of pods coming online, we're talking large clusters. So from the majority of smaller startups, this is a non-issue until the day it becomes an issue, and then it's a hard thing to work around.
But isn't that's why RDS proxy exists, right? So basically RDS proxy does connection pooling from all of those things. That's why you're supposed to insert RDS proxy in between your app and the actual database itself.
So if you use IAM authentication with RDS proxy, then you don't have. Okay. Fair point.
Yep.
Yeah, they say consider using connection pooling in your applications, blah, blah, blah. That makes sense. And I guess, when you're at that scale, having RDS proxy in the mix is also useful.
Regardless.
For other, it's for just useful in general.
Right. And that's also 200 authentication requests per second, right? Oh no, new connections per second. So sorry.
Hey, okay. We got another question from Tim. I don't know if we had everyone else on the call that day. I do remember your question, and I still stand by my answer, so I don't understand why that's not working for you. So Tim asked a question about a month back. The issue was, how do you resolve to the private IP of the load balancer when you're inside of AWS, and how do you get the public one when you're outside? Tim keeps on getting the public address returned for the ALB, and he said he tried a few things and it didn't work. I think the recommendations were: 1, make sure you're using the AWS resolver; 2, make sure you're not, for some reason, exiting the VPC and making that DNS query. So you're resolving that from the EC2 instance within the VPC direct to the AWS resolver, and then you should get that. I think as an interesting test would be just to spin up a test EC2 instance and see if you can reproduce the problem based on a public AWS AMI, nothing custom, etc. And possibly do it in a default AWS VPC, so there's nothing about your VPC configuration that is preventing that from working. So like the internal DNS resolver is, I think someone else said, it's like .2 or .3 or something like that on your
network. .2 on your subnet.
Yeah, so whatever your subnet is of your EC2, yeah, exactly, 192.168.1.2 would be that. So in this case, it would be like what Alex says, but instead of Nike, you would stick in the address of your AWS load balancer there, and running that command should result in the private IP address of your load balancer. Yeah, and then if you use like a public DNS resolver, like Cloudflare's 8.8.8, or is that Google's? I forget, 8.8.8.8, then you should get the public one.
Yeah, I think that's Google. I think 4.4.4.4 is someone else's too, but I think Cloudflare's is 1.1.1.1.
Yeah, they got the best one, but that one is also weird. It responds differently than a lot of other DNS resolvers on things. I forget what the situation was, but it's given me distrust. There's also the I think you can also resolve against this address, but And I think that's the same
Uh,
address as AWS as well.
Is it the 169, 254, 169,
Yeah.
253? That one? Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's some like for that one to work, I think there's some like config thing you need to turn on in the VPC. I think that came from like EC2 Classic. I think that was where the
Oh, that
origin
might
of
have
that thing
been.
was.
That
And
might
I
have
think
been.
you
Yeah.
need to turn on like I think it's like enable. There's like a thing that on the VPC configuration that's like enable DNS integration or something like that, and you have to turn that on in order for that thing to work.
Yeah. So this is still
Yeah,
public.
it still works.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that was like the origin of it, I think. So
Yeah.
but
So I guess I would try either of those and see what happens.
yeah. Alex just posted the thing I was talking about, that you need to turn on DNS support for your VPC.
Hmm.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Enable DNS support and enable DNS host names.
Yeah, I remember that bit
Yeah.
us once and a long ongoing engagement.
Yeah, that's usually what gets people. If it's not that, and you get the right value from the .2 DNS server in your VPC, then just check your host file. Like maybe someone got in there and stuck in a silly value.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time today. We've run a little bit over, but we also got a late start. If you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, you can find today's recording posted there in a few hours, as well as the back catalog of all of our past recordings. Great way to share the wealth with your team. If you haven't joined our Slack team yet, go to slack.cloudposse.com and you can join us in the Office Hours channel there, or the Terraform or Atmos or Cloud Posse channels if you want to get a hold of us. We also have a podcast. It is a syndication of today's office hours and our past office hours. So if you want to listen to this on the bus or the train or however you get around, check out podcast.cloudposse.com. Lastly, if you are interested in working with Cloud Posse and want to see if we can move the needle for you at your organization, go to cloudposse.com/quiz, answer a few quick questions, and you can book a meeting with me directly. We'll go over your situation to see if we can help. Again, that's cloudposse.com/quiz. Thanks, everyone. See you all next week. Same time, same place.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.